Yo, what's up, everybody? This is Pastor Ramon, aka Pastor Ray, and welcome to the Well. Welcome to the Well. If you were on with us, why don't you take a second, like this post if you're on Facebook, and share this post to your page. And then if you're on YouTube, just let us know you're in the building so we can say hello to you. Just love to greet you and let you know that we're here. If you know somebody who should be tuned in to tonight's well, let them know that we're on live. I'm so happy to be with you guys this evening, and we have a really good conversation for you this evening. We are talking about everyone. God loves everyone except those ones. The weaponizing of church, and more specifically tonight, the weaponizing of race. Man, so we're really looking forward to diving in. Listen, a couple of quick things you guys know about. What's up, brother Jawan? I see you're on. What's up, Miss Belly? What's up, Mama? I know that you guys are all on because I can see it. Tonight is like any other week. We want you to encounter the well, become the well, emerge, and share the well. That's our motto here. You encounter Jesus, become more like Jesus, emerge and share Jesus. Encounter love, become love, emerge and share love. That's our motto. Encounter the well, become the well, emerge and share the well. All right. We do believe that everything that we do here at the well should lead you down a path. And that path is very specific. We have what we call the 5 P's. Everybody say five. And those 5 P's, as you can see on the screen, are passion, purpose, promise, peace, and power. Let's say it again. Passion, your purpose, your promise, your peace, and your power. That's the 5 P's that we hope that everything that we do leads you down. Listen, the well community is a well that we want to invite you. All right. So feel free to comment as we go through this conversation tonight. Follow us on all our social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all of them at Encounter the Well. Have a friend subscribe to our channel. Let your family know this is a dope faith community because the well is a creative arts and conscious awareness faith community. Listen, this is the most different type of church you'll ever experience. I promise you, because we're pretty cool. And anybody that's involved, we call them our Wellians. So glad to see all of our Wellians tonight. Listen, tonight we have such a great panel and a very special guest. And so I'm not going to belabor the hour because we have a great conversation. Listen, make sure you tune in for the next two because tonight we're talking about weaponizing race, and then next week we're talking about weaponizing sexuality. So we're going to really deep dive into them places, them gray areas that a lot of times folks don't want to talk about. We're going to talk about it. But tonight, we're going to bring in our panel. So I'm going to ask our producers to go ahead and bring us in. Look at these amazing, fabulous faces on the screen. So glad to see you all tonight. We have with us, starting from my left on the screen, I guess maybe you're right, the executive minister, Minister Harrison, followed by Brennan B, followed by Reverend Mama Dent, and then Brother Tolu, who's down there. Listen, I'm going to start with Minister Harrison and just let him greet the people. Go ahead, Minister Harrison. What do you got to say to the folks, man?
Listen, first of all, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good night. I don't know when you're watching this, but hello, somebody, okay? That's how you're supposed to greet the saints, listen, my name is Harrison. I serve as executive minister to the well. I do my part here in helping us operationally and administratively focus. Definitely glad to be a part of this conversation tonight. I think it's going to be cool. I'm excited. Listen, I'm going to popcorn this thing on to Brennan B.
Y'all know what it is, man. Black at it again, black at it to win. Let's get it excited for this conversation. This is gonna be one of them ones. We already know, y'all know how I feel about the church and my love-hate relationship with it. So this one is near and dear to that conversation. So let's shoot it over to the right Reverend Mother.
Yeah.
And it's the right Reverend Mother in the house tonight. So glad to be amongst the congregation, if you will. As always, it's a joy to be here and encounter the well. I am so excited about this evening and absolutely honored to be on the panel with our guest this evening. I cannot wait for us to get started. So I've shortened my conversation. I'm turning it back over to Pastor Ray.
Yes. Listen, Yeah, I know I'll be trying to do everything at once. But I'd like to introduce to you all a good brother. This is actually my first time as well, meeting my brother who's on tonight with us. But I'm ecstatic to have him on. And he's going to let me know if I absolutely stagger on his name here. But Brother Tolu Olorunipia is
Pretty
a
close.
journalist,
Pretty close.
author, and entrepreneur currently serving. Catch this, you guys. Currently serving is the White House Bureau Chief of the Washington Post. He is the co-author of His Name is George Floyd, One Man's Life and the Struggle for Racial Justice. If you don't have this book, please pick it up and we'll talk more about it, which is a finalist for the National Book Award. His writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg News, the Chicago Tribune, Business Week magazine, the Miami Herald, the Tampa Bay Times, and so many other publications. Is a White House correspondent covering the last 3 presidents. He has been featured on CNN, MSNBC, PBS, CBS News, NPR, Bloomberg, C-SPAN, and so many other outlets. He began covering the White House in 2014, reporting from 5 continents and more than 20 countries during 3 presidencies. A native of Tallahassee, Florida, and the son of Nigerian immigrants, he graduated from Stanford University with a bachelor's and a master's degree in sociology. We are so honored that he took the time to step away from the White House.
Hold on. Time out. First of all, we all underdressed. We should have came in here with suits and ties on. You feel me, like Harrison? Because like the way that resume just ran down, fam. Like what? Yo, that's crazy.
Hey, I was like, he's not out of breath yet. He's still going.
Right.
You
name dropped every important news outlet. You feel me? Like
all alphabet. Yeah.
Hold on a minute. I got to go get my pearls.
right.
Listen, Tolu, can you just greet the people, man? Anything special you like to say, man, before we get this conversation started?
Yeah, well, thank you. First of all, it's really great to be here. Y'all make the whole environment just seem very relaxed, and I like that. I'm used to being in, hot rooms of press conferences and press briefings where everybody's all buttoned up and serious, and it's all high tension and all of that. So it's a pleasure to be here. Robert and I, my co-author, who was really the special guest who was going to be here. He had a family emergency, but he sends his love as well. Robert Samuels, who I wrote this book with. We spent a lot of time, digging in on some of the themes of the book, themes of spirituality, themes of the word. And so a lot of that, surprisingly for a lot of people, that was part of George Floyd's life. It was part of his orbit. And so I'm happy to dig into, the whole topic of weaponizing race. And I'm looking forward to the discussion, because this is very different from the kinds of discussions that we've been in with people asking us all kinds of different political questions. This is the kind of conversation that I feel comfortable having. I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully it'll be an open conversation where we can just talk about, whatever's on everybody's mind, whatever questions anybody has about George Floyd, about the movement that came up after his death. All of that's in the book, and we spent a lot of time researching it. So I'm happy to talk about it. Robert loves talking about this stuff as well. And so I'm happy to be here, and I'm ready to go.
Awesome, man. We're so glad to have you. Definitely salute to Robert, who's a good friend of mine as well. Definitely in his absence, I reached out to him. I said, listen, man, you can't make it tonight. So one, we'll have to schedule some time to do a conversation on the side with you and post that up. But also he recommended you, and the moment that he couldn't make it, he said, hey, let me just check in with my friend and co-author. And again, you did not have to be here. So we're just humbled and appreciative that you're taking the time to be with us. We're going to hop right in real quick to Miles Walker. You're watching. I saw you say good evening. What's up, Miles? Torin Cooper, glad to see you here. and all the other Wellians and the folks who have chimed in. Go ahead, take a moment and share this on your pages. Send it to your family. Say, oh, you need to watch the conversation. We love for you to do that. I guess my first question, Tolu, is the co-author of his name is George Floyd. You know, what about the George Floyd story resonated with you in particular as a Black man in America? You know, what called you to it? What made you feel anything towards this story?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I could probably spend the whole hour talking about it, so I'll try to keep my answer somewhat brief. There's a lot in this book, and I'll start off by saying that you know, both Robert and I were Black men in America when the video of George Floyd's heinous murder started playing on a loop on cable television. We were both in newsrooms. We were both reporting. We were both covering the presidential election, covering you know, the state of a number of different issues in America, and there was a little bit of exhaustion. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and we had both covered racial protests in the past. We'd both been in Ferguson and other places where, you know, you had sort of seen what happens after someone is killed by the police. You have the protest, you have people calling for change, cameras come, cameras leave. You know, sometimes something gets burned down, but nothing really changes over time. So we had been through that process. That process, you know, can be a little tiring, especially, you know, as a Black man looking at, you know, this death on camera that's, you know, highly emotional, highly traumatic, and then seeing what happens afterward. A lot of times no change, sometimes no conviction, sometimes no systemic change, even though, you know, people are coming out into the streets and calling for it. So both Robert and I were a little reluctant to engage with this story as journalists. We had no choice but to engage with it as Black men because, you know, we're living in America and we all see George Floyd. We saw the way he died, and we realized that could have been us. It could have been, you know, our loved ones, our brothers, our uncles, our people that we know in our lives. And so it was very easy to see that as a potential outcome for people who look like us, who don't get the benefit of the doubt a lot of times in this country. And so that was the genesis of everything. But when we started to engage with George Floyd as a human being and took the time to first write a series about his life and look at how his life sort of exemplified the way systemic racism operates in America, we realized that there was something bigger that could be accomplished. There's something that, you know, we could use the fact that people are paying attention to try to open people's eyes to, you know, this part of the Black experience. So there was a lot when we started to dig into George Floyd's life, his family history, his childhood, his adolescence, his experiences with police, his experiences in the housing system and the healthcare system and the criminal justice system. There were a lot of things that resonated, and it made it clear. I mean, the thesis of the book essentially is that before George Floyd was killed by the police officer, he was slowly being killed by American systems that were racist. And a lot of those systems were stacked against him. And he didn't get the grace that you would expect from, you know, an equal society. When he made a mistake, society, you know, cracked down on him. And sometimes even when he didn't make a mistake, when he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, he had, you know, the harshest part of society respond, as opposed to the merciful part of society, the second chance part of society, the, oh, that's just boys being boys or kids being kids. Let's give them a second chance. Let's steer them in the right direction. And so, you know, that all resonated with me because I've seen that kind of response, you know, growing up, where you don't get, you know, you have to grow up much faster because of the way you look. People all of a sudden, you know, out of the blue think you're much older than you are because of your height, because of your size. One of the things that resonated with me about George Floyd as a human is that, you know, he would go into a room. He was tall. He's 6'4", you know, 200 some odd pounds. He was a big guy. And he realized that. He realized that being a big person, being a big Black person, meant that there was going to be certain stereotypes that came along with that. So he would try to combat that by every time he would go into a room, he would shake everybody's hand, look them in the eye, strangers, people he didn't know, and just sort of try to get a fair shake from people, try to get them to see him as a person, not as a big force, not as somebody who's intimidating, not as someone that they need to be afraid of. And he was always a little bit uncomfortable in the size of his body because he was not an aggressive person. Everybody we spoke to said he would go around saying, "I love you" to people, just because that was his spirit. That was his energy. He wasn't, someone who would exploit the fact that he was larger and that he might intimidate someone or be able to use that against them. Instead, he would be a little bit awkward about the fact that he was so big and try to get people to be put at ease. And so there are so many things about his personal story, his experiences with race and racism that really resonated with us, and we wanted to try to put as much of that into the book as possible, because it's so easy to see George Floyd, to see the way he died, to see his criminal record, to see the worst parts of him and think that that's all there is to the story. We wanted to peel back some of the layers and see that it's not just about the video, it's about an entire story, an entire person's history. And as journalists, that's one of the few pieces of power that we have, is to be able to tell someone's story. We can't write laws. We can't put people in jail. We can't prosecute anybody. We can't even subpoena people to get their information. We can come to you and say, we want to tell your story. We want to tell the story of your loved one. And so, that was something that resonated a lot. The fact that people wanted to share with us the George Floyd they knew, the Third Ward of Houston that they knew, the, housing project they knew, the segregated school that they grew up in, and they wanted to tell us about those things. We wanted to be able to broaden the story, so it wasn't just one bad police officer against one person on a bad day. It's an entire system that we wanted to be able to investigate and explore, and that's what we wanted to accomplish with this book. And we really felt honored to be able to do it. We spoke to more than 400 people. We interviewed a ton of people who knew George Floyd, people who knew experts and people in academia, people in churches, and we were able to tell a lot of his story. And I will just, we'll get into this as well, but I'll just end by saying that George Floyd was someone who found peace and solace in the church. He left Houston to go to Minneapolis. When he hit rock bottom, he wanted to leave where he was from, and he went to a pastor who essentially told him, sometimes you have to pick up, and when you hit rock bottom, you have to go to a new place. He said that's what happened in a number of different stories in the Bible, where people realized that if they wanted to change, they had to leave their home, they had to leave where they were comfortable and go to somewhere new. And he also said that change takes time. That a number of different stories in the Bible, people who wanted to get change, they didn't get it right away. It took time. It took the constant effort of continuing to be in a place where you're pushing for that change. And that's one of the reasons why he left his home and moved to another state to try to get treatment, to try to get a job, to try to find peace that he couldn't find in his home. And so a lot of people would not know that about George Floyd, but that's something we discovered as we spent a lot of time in the same places where he did and talking to the people that he knew.
Yeah, I mean, man, you really, you really uncovered so much in this book. There's this line
in that intro, first of all.
Yeah.
If you ain't learned something from the intro, that tells you need to get the book. I mean, we got to have different conversations, but
No, for real. The book you talk about, you all start off with this line. I know you start off with the "I love you," but there's this moment in the beginning, in the introduction, you say, "We hoped to place Floyd's experiences within the context of the myriad forces that operated in the background during his 46 years, never absolving him of responsibility or making excuses for his actions." And I love that, because you kind of, to me, right, you were saying, yes, George Floyd was this person who had his own issues, his own problems, but I took it as, you can't just look at this moment and define, right, his life by this moment. You really have to look at not only his 40-some years of living, but also the history, right, of what brought him to this place in the present. And you in the book talk a lot. You all uncover the fact that his great-great-grandfather, right, had all of this land, and then the land was taken, right? And so you talk about how his great great grandfather wanted to set him up for this gift, right, of being heirs to the kingdom, if you will. But even that dream was taken away, and so there are these criminal and unjust acts that are constantly happening that sort of set George up to even be in this place. So again, not taken away from his own actions, but sort of just talking about the path that got him to that place. And I think we see that in all of us, in all of us, especially in Black America.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the history, the family history around George Floyd. A lot of people don't know this. We tried to do as much research as we could to talk to people who knew his family history, to go back into the archives and dig in and find out about, the question we wanted to answer was, we knew that George Floyd was born into deep poverty, not everyday regular poverty, deep poverty. Grew up, started off in North Carolina. Grandparents lived in a 3-room shack, no indoor plumbing, outhouses, people having to be sharecroppers and whatnot. So, we're talking deep rural poverty that he was born into. And this is the early 1970s. This isn't like, 1905 or anything like that. This is deep into the 20th century. And so we wanted to answer the question, how did this happen? This is a family that came to America at the very beginning of this country, worked hard over hundreds of years. And so all of that hard work you'd expect would translate into some generational wealth. You work hard, you build up a little bit of a nest egg, you pass it down to the next generation. They work hard, they have a little bit of a leg up from where you started. So they are a little bit up the ladder. They work hard for their lives and they build up a little bit more and pass it down. That's how generational wealth works in this country. But for George Floyd's family, that's how it's supposed to work, right? For George Floyd's family, because of the exploitation and the history of racism and racial terror in America, they had been working hard, not only just working hard, but working in the system of slavery before they even had a chance to work for themselves, working and having all of their wealth stripped away. And then when they got their freedom, they kept working hard. And George Floyd's great-great-grandfather, who was born enslaved, after he got his freedom, he worked hard for 30 years and was able to get 500 acres of land, which made him pretty wealthy in North Carolina at the time. 500 acres is nothing to sneeze at in the early 100s. And so he worked pretty hard, and his goal was to pass all that wealth down to the next generation. But he had all of that stripped away through fraud, tax fraud. Essentially, people didn't like the fact that there was a wealthy Black man living in their community, building up wealth, and he was more wealthy than a lot of the white people in his community. And that was not going to last very long, not because he did anything wrong, but just because people didn't like that at all. So they essentially had him dealt with, and he had all his land stripped away. And once you have that kind of theft of generational wealth, it's very hard to start back up. So, George Floyd's great-grandparents and his grandparents and even his parents worked as sharecroppers in North Carolina. And working as sharecroppers, you're not going to really be able to build up very much wealth, because you're going to work hard and you're going to see all of that money go to the landowner because you don't own the land. You're basically just a worker, and you're at the mercy of the landowner, and you get cheated. His ancestors were cheated out of a lot of wealth. And so we wanted to answer that question. And that is key to understanding his story, key to understanding why he came into the world in deep poverty, and all of the things that were made difficult for him, all of the things that were cut off from him from a very early age. We thought it was important to put that context in there. Now, obviously, every person has their own agency. Every person has the opportunity to try to make the best of the hands that they were dealt. And so we talk about that. We grapple with some of the choices that George Floyd made, some of the choices that were made for him, the times where he made mistakes and tried to pick himself up, and how society responds when you're poor and you try to write your course, but you don't really have very many resources. And, we tried to cover all of that in the book and get to the backstory of George Floyd before you can even ask the question, what did he do with his life? How did he spend his time? How did he use the opportunities, the gifts that he was given? You have to look at the context, look at the history, look at the background. And we wanted to do that and make sure that people understood that, there are tons of people like George Floyd who, if there was more justice in this country's history, they would have come into the world with all kinds of opportunities, with all kinds of safety nets. They would have been able to rely on the hard work of their ancestors. But because of the way that the system was set up, there was no safety net. There was a situation where that safety net was stripped away. And then all of a sudden you come into the world with very little margin for error, very little space to operate. If you make a mistake, if you miss a bill, if you have an emergency, all of a sudden everything starts spiraling and you find yourself in very tough situations where you have to figure out how to make ends meet. And that's part of the lack of justice. One other thing I'll say about George Floyd's family history was, he comes from a proud family. He comes from a family that was, hardworking, industrious. His grandmother, she was a sharecropper, but she taught herself how to play the piano because she knew she needed to, make some extra money. She had 22 children, and she needed, all of them worked in the field sharecropping alongside their parents, but, they had a lot of mouths to feed and they needed to make some money. So one of the things she did was she learned to play the piano by ear, and she would hire herself out to churches in North Carolina every Sunday where she would play the piano for them. They'd give her a little money at the end of the service. She used that money to try to help provide for her family. On the weekends, on the one day that she had off, when she wasn't sharecropping, she'd be in the church playing the piano, and also, in addition to getting the word, she'd get a little bit of a benefit from being able to help the churches. So that's the kind of family that he came from. That's the kind of background and history that he had. That tells you a lot about what what we were able to find out in his story. A lot of it dates back to his family history and the family that he grew up in. And a lot of people who saw the video of him dying heard him, calling out for his mother. And that part of that was based on those strong family ties and that strong family relationship that sort of birthed him into the world and that brought him a lot of the values that he ended up having. So it was important for us to dig into that family history to set us up in terms of telling his story, because you can't tell the story of someone like George Floyd, a modern Black American, without telling the story of their families, which is very much the history of this country that often doesn't get told when we're telling the history of America.
Yeah, listen. Again, y'all, if you're just joining us, we're talking. We're joined on the panel tonight by Tolo Alarunipa, who is the co-author, along with Robert Samuels, of His Name is George Floyd. If you do not have the book, you've got to pick up the book. My grandmother borrowed it from me earlier, and I almost didn't get my book back. So I'm gonna have to get her a copy as well.
Don't you be snitching on grandma. Leave her out of this.
Yeah, I don't like how you did that. You tried to throw grandma under the bus.
She probably got her belt around the corner. Wait till he get off that live.
I know, right? Well, listen, she'll be glad that you guys took up for her. And she's gonna say that's right. See how your friends they do me better than you do. I know I'm gonna get the conversation after this. Listen, I want to open up the dialogue though a little bit more to all our panelists. Reverend Mama Dent. Look, historically, the church has been at the center in the fight for social justice. We know, right? Martin Luther King, the civil rights movement, all started in the church. From what we all know, right? How has the church's role evolved? And now I'm opening it up, just everybody, and even before I well into it online, Sean, Jawan, all of the folks who are with us, how has the church, in its fight for civil justice, how have we seen that evolve?
Well, I mean, tonight was already difficult for me because I'm a mom. George Floyd's mother was born 10 years before me. Mm-hmm. I was born in North Carolina. I lived on a sharecropper's farm. Mm-hmm. And so all of this, I think about this and I say, so where was the church? How's the church evolved? Well, the church was our foundation. That's what helped us move forward into, say, the 70s, that period of time where it seemed like the doors had opened for us as Black people in America. And we were beginning to be educated and we were beginning to move into an area of employment. I think the church was then and still can be, and in some ways is, our foundation. That's where our values come from. But we now have the opportunity to be the church outside of the walls of the building. And so the church is present, just like Tolu and Robert used their pen.
Mm. Mm.
We get too locked in to defining, quote unquote, the church. The power of the pen. They wrote that story. That story will never go away. That's the power of the church. Are we having the kind of impact that Martin Luther King and those had when they did the protest and got all of the media attention? Well, that's debatable, because even what they did maybe were a couple of big things, but there were so many little things. He was killed because he was getting ready to protest poverty and the mistreatment of people in Memphis in terms of their wages. That's still a problem. Hadn't changed. And there are still church people out fighting the battle. For example, what happened here in Prince George's County, where the legislation was passed to make Juneteenth a paid holiday. Well, you know that there were church people involved in advocating for that change. And as a matter of fact, I believe one of the authors of the legislation belongs to a church, local church here in Prince George's County. So the church is present. We just may not see it in the same way that we have in the past.
Yeah. That's good. Now I have a little pushback. I love pushback from my folks. Jawan says, one of our Wellians, he says, I feel as though the church currently is too quiet, too PC, afraid to be bold in the word. I think, I lost it. I think that the church is present, but we're preaching to each other. It's time for us to be vocal again, even when it's uncomfortable.
It's crazy. Like, I think what I appreciated about the book and the perspective that it offered, is that it was very similar to my kind of perspective on rap music. So again, I'm so mad I wasn't on for our debate about rap music, because I think that part of what we are doing is demifying or and talking down on, say, like the result of something that happened way before. So we look at the art of rap in that scenario as like, oh no, this is bad, and it's like, well, there's things these people are talking about their life. If you don't like these stories, then do something to change the life that they live. And kind of as Tolu was explaining, it's kind of that same scenario, same conversation with George Floyd. Is like there's a series of things that led it to that moment. And where he should absolutely still have received grace and still should, have his life. We can't ignore the series of things that caused that moment to happen. And from both sides, not just from George Floyd's side, but also from, the side of the police. There are things that happened that led them to that moment to devalue his life in that way, from my perspective. And so that's the full conversation that needs to be had, is what are all the pieces that led to this, and how do we begin to systematically cut down those pieces that would lead to a moment like this. And I think from recent history, we still got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Harrison, you shaking your head. What you thinking, brother?
One, man, y'all done said some good stuff. Let me just acknowledge that. Y'all ain't about to get that deep for me right now. All right. But I think one of the things I do want to highlight in regards to the church is that, man, I was just literally reading over Acts chapter 16. Most people are familiar with the story of Paul and Silas going to prison. But before you get to that part, I think that's somewhere around verse 16, 18, something like that. In the first part of that chapter, you actually see the journey that Paul is taking to go check on other churches. He done met with his people. He said, hey, we need to go check on these people over here that's not near us. Go check on them in that place. Go check on them. And he's on his second missionary journey to go check on his fellow brothers and sisters that are believers. And then to save those along the way who need saving. He was doing something in that chapter that I think is very important to note, is that he was going to prayer meetings that were down by lakes and rivers. They were meeting in houses and homes. They were meeting in uncommon temples, right? Because Big C Church is us. Now let's just set that straight. I see a lot of the comments and y'all talking good in there.
They are talking good.
Yeah, you listen. You're talking good. But I want to make sure that we make the distinction that when we are talking about the church, that's the Big C Church. That's us. That is not an organization. That is not a denomination. That's not a facility. That's not the nice restroom you use on Sunday mornings or not. You know, praise God, because some of y'all trifling. Amen. I didn't say it. But listen, I'm getting in trouble right now.
Potty mouth.
But the point being that, you know, when we are referencing the church, that's us. We are the people. We are the ones that's supposed to be able to go out. We are the ones that's supposed to be able to be the arms and the feet, not just of God, but for each other. Because one of the things that we saw, and this was how many years ago? So many, over 2,000 years ago. They're doing the same thing, meeting in uncommon places to help people that can't help themselves, to help people that, and maybe they can help themselves, but can't get the help that they quite need. And I even saw Jordan Dent posted a comment. What up, Jay Dent? Saw her post a comment about Bishop Rudolph McKissick down in Florida that's giving Governor DeSantis, you know, some serious stuff, some serious issue about being able to engage our young people in this education system, being able to get them the funding and the resources that need. From Acts chapter 16 to 2023, we are dealing with some of these same problems. From April 4th, 1968, Dr. King dying in my home city in Memphis, to now this year, just what was that, last week, celebrating the life and the legacy of Tyree Nichols. We're dealing with these same things historically. It is not the church's fault, but there are some places absolutely we got to stand up. That's not even necessarily part of your question right here, but I feel it on my heart to say right now that there are some places that as Black ministers, as Black preachers, and I mean, even non, does not matter. Social justice message has to continue to push forward. It should be out in the pulpits. It should be on the corners. It should be in somebody's house. It should be at the dinner table. We got to start making these conversations so much more common. And yes, we do jump fences in Memphis if we don't kick them down.
but okay, Harrison, I love what you're saying. But so I want to push it. Tolu, I'm gonna come to you with this question. So we talk about, I'm glad you made the difference there, right? You talk about the Black church, right? Which is a whole separate experience kind of to an itself. And then you talk about the overall church that was really heavily influenced, right, by the Anglo-Saxon sort of religion and dominance of coming over here. I'm wondering, especially, and I'm gonna come to you, Tolo, with this question, because I see that Giovanni is in the comments and he kind of talked a little bit about the church also justified beating and killing slaves, depending on where you went. Most specifically the white church, but we're not going to act like the Black church didn't have his hands sometimes, and even trading off his own brothers and sisters. Tolu, as you did your research and you go back to the influential things of George Floyd, but even just in your research as a journalist and knowing the history of the Black church and the church overall, I'm wondering, is for as much as the church has been the defender of civil rights and a leader in social justice, do we pass any blame to the overall church for its role in the corruptedness? Is there a place where the church has played a big part? And does it still play a big part in the corruptedness of the land?
Ooh, Pastor, you're going to get me in trouble. No, that's a really
share at your own risk.
Good and insightful question. I will say, you know, there are two sides. That, one thing as a journalist, we can be annoying in some ways that we present both sides of the equation. We have to talk to both sides, and so sometimes it can be like you're not taking a position. But I will do a little bit of my journalistic thing here, where I'll present a little bit of both sides and see what the folks listening think. But in our research for this book and just sort of general research, both of the civil rights movement and of the movement that took place after George Floyd died, we did see the impact and the importance of people of faith, of the church, of being an organizing ground for a lot of these movements, of having, the leaders of the civil rights movement in the 60s and the leaders of the current movements that we see every time there's a hashtag. A lot of times they are people from the church. A lot of the organizing that took place when we went to Ferguson and when we went to Minneapolis, a lot of it was taking place in the church as a physical building, as a meeting space, as a place where people could gather. People of all different faiths, people of different backgrounds, people of no faith sometimes would just go to the church because that's the place where, they found a protective space where they could go, they could organize, they could get their protest signs ready. There is value in having that organizational structure, being able to call together a protest, being able to get people together, being able to have the response and the reaction and the activism organized. And a lot of that is the muscle memory of the church being involved from the civil rights movement all the way up until now. And, there's a lot of value in that, because if you don't have organization, I will tell you from my experience covering some of these things, you will not get very much done. I'm not saying that the organization has to happen through the church, but I think a lot of the times that is the pathway that people are familiar with. That's the pathway where there are resources, there are connections, there's the background and the history. And so the church has a lot of value and has had a lot of value for a lot of these movements. At the same time, there can be some, staleness to having that history, and it can be the kind of thing where we've seen this happen before. It can be a replay where you're not pushing the boundaries as much, where you're not making people as uncomfortable as they should be. And that can be an area where, the church can be comfortable for the people who need to be uncomfortable. The politicians, the leaders, the people who need to make change can feel like, okay, they're going to a church. They're going to follow certain rules and certain guidelines or certain boundaries they're not going to cross. They're people we can talk to try to, calm things down and make sure things don't go beyond where they're supposed to go. We can say the right things. We can go to the church, or we can go to the right person and do the right show of face without actually committing to change. And so there can be a little bit of, it can be a little bit too comfortable. And I think, for people who want to see change, it can be very easy to see how there can be frustration, because as a lot of people in the comments have said, the church was used to justify things that should have never been justified in this country's history. And that was part of what making people comfortable was all about. And even during the movement for abolition, a lot of times it was, and even during the movement for civil rights, a lot of times it was, you can only go so far. Like, let's not push things too far because we want to make sure that things get done. And a lot of times that incrementalism can be frustrating for people who want to see things move, people who are, have agony about the injustices that are out there. And Jesus had agony when he flipped tables in the church. So, there's some righteous anger in that, and there's some righteousness in that anger for especially the activists that are out there. So there's always that tension. And I won't, say what's right, because I'm still trying to figure that out myself. But I will say that, there's a lot of tension in that part of trying to figure out what the role of the church should be, and, whether or not the movement can be a movement without the church, or can disassociate itself from the church and still be successful. Because it's a difficult place to be. I see Brennan. Brennan's got some words.
Yo,
listen,
everybody know my favorite bar from J. Cole: "What good is taking over when we know what you're gonna do? The only real revolution happens right inside of you." like is the reality of what happened. Like the church at one time was the antagonist and then became the home for the people that they were antagonizing. Like, and it's because like you it's that search for power, and once you have it, like if you don't do your own work, if you don't do your internal work and make sure that that power doesn't pervert you, then you're gonna fall into those same traps. And it's like I actually did and I went to what was it, Liberty University, which is super conservative school. I should have never went there, but it was fun. It was fun to go. But I did one of my papers while I was getting my master's degree in strategic communications was on Apple, and how at the beginning of their marketing strategy, and when they were first becoming a company, their literal focus in their campaign and in their marketing was to encourage people to be creative outside of the box, and the box was PC. And it was like they were encouraging everybody to think outside the box. Don't be, the uniform, cookie cutter person. Be creative and all of that. And now we come to where we are now, where they literally are the opposite of that, and they want everyone to just be Apple, or just to use the singular. Like, I mean, it took forever for them to come up with a second version of the iPhone, and not a new edition, but to have a big versus small. Steve Jobs was wholly against it while he was alive, and so it's like we see it so many times in history where an antagonist turns into what they always hated or what they were fighting against, because they seen the problem, but then once you get in the situation, if you haven't done the work to really understand why it is a problem, you're going to fall into that same trap. And it's dangerous. And I think that for now, and where the church is right now, they've fallen into that trap. And I think, as you always know, I say, like, the struggle with church and hip hop is that hip hop has become, and hip hop culture has become, more of a change agent than the church, because the church wants you to again fall into that cookie cutter model, and that's completely opposite of hip hop. It's completely opposite of the culture of hip hop. It is the antagonist, and I don't foresee it ever not becoming that, because of how it was generated, how it came about, and the voice that it is given to so many people. And again, as we all come back to it, it's funny that we get in these situations, and now, like, the church being sometimes unaware of the change and the shift in power dynamic, to where these movements, where they once were always started in the church, they've started outside the church, because people recognize that the church was becoming the problem.
Okay, so now I've held my peace.
Uh-oh.
But now I got to come back out. And I'm going to do this in the King James Version. Mm-hmm. Abide in me, and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine. No more can ye, except ye abide in me. The heart of the matter is Jesus. Jesus was a revolutionary. They did not kill Jesus because he was a kind man. He came in, wrecking the joint. He told the old religious regime, he called them whitewashed tombs. So obviously, there must be always transformation that's occurring. The church must continue to evolve. But social justice was Jesus's message, and is still the message. There is no reason to have a conversation about social justice if you're not talking about Jesus in the church. You won't find, the folks on Wall Street talking about social justice. That's not happening. So we have to stay focused on what is our commitment to be disciples. Mm-hmm. The church had power because we grew people. We helped them develop the right character traits and to understand where their help came from. And that's how the church could produce fruit. When we look at the church, we have to remember what's happening to us as the church. There was a faction, there is still a faction in the US. I like the way you described this in the book, Tola. You said when George Floyd took his first breaths in 73, the strictures of Jim Crow style discrimination in America had given way to what would become a more enduring and insidious kind of racism, a systemic version that would calcify just beneath the surface of American society. In American society, people of our hue were property and were never seen as human beings. And I don't care how many laws you pass, until we are seen as human beings by other folks, we're not welcomed by other folks, but that doesn't mean we're not welcomed by God. Mm-hmm. And because of our relationship with God, we recognize our power. And our power is not necessarily only in the church anymore, but we've got to grow people who understand what that social justice message is all about. It's look out for the widows and the orphans and the fatherless and those who are oppressed. You don't learn that social justice message getting a law degree or a degree in finance and banking. So when we talk about where is the church and what is necessary, we still got to make that connection. I got to disciple people. I got to grow people to help them understand. They got to grow in a relationship. They got to have one. Because as Deacon J. Cole said, that transformation, where it occur?
Right inside of you.
Okay. You know, and to go back to Brennan, mm-hmm. Hip hop and rap and music, they tell our story. Mm-hmm. That's what we did in hymns. That's what we did in the hush harbors. We told our story. So we can't run from the story we're telling, because to deny the truth of where George Floyd walked is to turn our backs on him. Mm-hmm. And the people that need the basics of life and to be treated as human beings, shown grace and mercy. But if I don't see you as a human being in the first place, grace and mercy is not in my arsenal of tools that I'm going to treat you with. Okay, I'm quiet.
I mean, listen, I love when
I'm just glad I went before Mama Dent.
But your daughter says next road trip we're listening to Deacon J. Cole, Mama.
Cold world, no snuggies. Y'all feel me?
You know, is it that? But okay, but in this like complexity of like Black and African American culture, do you think that like, kind of back to Brennan, what you were saying, like there's this intersection of like where I think we as a people are so split and divided amongst ourselves sometimes that it's hard, right, to really progress forward, because you're right, Mama. Like to me, hip hop does tell our story, right? It definitely tells our story, and sometimes it tells our story. I love the reference there in the way the hymns did, right? Like there's this truth, but I think we've grown up from where we were, and we've realized that the church does not always deal with the actual truth, right? Because it has its own systematic ways of sort of sculpting itself. And you can get so caught up in the system of church that you then, to me, right, you lose yourself and you get caught in the fight and the struggle, right? Well, hip hop, because we start to then sort of like, I think, create this bubble that hip hop is all the same, right? And so because it's negative here and negative there and negative here, it's horrible for the culture. And we can't allow hip hop in the church. And then we can't allow hip hop to lead in the fight for justice because it's all negative. and and it has too many people exploiting money and exploiting females and wearing their britches low and their pants sagging. And
Did you just
because
say britches?
keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. I heard myself, and I was
Listen.
like, keep moving.
He turned my ring light off. Hey.
I heard myself. I listen. I pulled my grandmother's spirit in me. Okay, but like I think we get so caught up in that place that is a culture we can't even figure out who's in the lead anymore. I think we're too stuck trying to fight each other, and I think we've gotten to this place where the church is like fighting itself, and it can't fight justice because we fighting ourselves, and I mean that is the capital C, right?
I think
the people,
right, and I think that's it comes back to what Harrison was talking about earlier and making that definition between the Big C church and the system or institution. I think the institution is struggling with the fact that the Big C church is understanding its value and its worth, for real, and is understanding that the Big C church doesn't need the institution. Is great to have. It can be pleasant to have, but it's not necessary to make the changes that we want to see in the world. It's not like we aren't bound to the institution or the systems that church has built, because we've recognized as the Big C church that these systems are pretty, I mean, in some ways mirrors of the systems that the church fought against.
And we have these moments in our history, in our country, where we paper over some of these differences, like George Floyd is killed, and all of a sudden people come together, and it's easy to say this was wrong. And so you paper over some of these differences. You have, white churches and black churches coming together. You have big institutional, organizations, and, more upstart, more social justice oriented ministries, all on the same page. This was wrong. We can take to the streets and say justice for George Floyd. But then after the initial moment where everyone is on the same page, you start to get into some of the nitty gritty of what do we want to do about it? How do we want to go about making change? Where are the areas we want to focus this movement? Then things start to break apart, because you have, some institutions that are more comfortable with certain things, some that are a little bit more radical and say that, Jesus was a radical, and so we need to upend the system. And then things start to break down a little bit. And that's what we saw. And we cover some of that in the final part of the book, where it's after George Floyd has died, and we're looking at the movement, we're looking at the push for change in Congress and institutions, and the backlash, and people saying there's too much change, and people falling off the movement, saying I'm not too comfortable with some of this. And that's the challenge that we ran into, the challenge that we ended up covering, is that there are moments where you can paper over some of these differences because everyone can see something that's wrong and say that's wrong. But then when it gets to the point of saying what are we going to do about it, those differences start to emerge, and that's how it becomes difficult to actually make change, because all of a sudden you have people that were once, elbow to elbow in the streets chanting together. Now that you got to go talk about legislation, you got to go talk about real change, you got to make some people uncomfortable. Then all of a sudden it becomes difficult to get that same coalition and have people stick together. And that's the challenge that we have. We see it over and over again with these different instances. And it's a big question about how you bridge that, how you get beyond those first initial protests to actually making change and keeping people on the same page, for sure.
If I could comment right there real quick, I think this may be more of a philosophical solution, but regardless, I think it's at the heart of exactly what you just said, but the heart of our conversation, generally, is that, first of all, hip hop and hymnologists have both been on extremes far too often. Let's just we've already kind of touched on that. I'm just bringing that back around because I think it's important for us to acknowledge what Reverend Mother said was super powerful, that both of them are telling our people stories. Mm-hmm. You, my people, you, my people, you, my people, we are all our people. Both of these entities are telling our stories. But there was something that Reverend Mother said, man, this was sometime last year. I was able to watch part of her ministry in action, and it was through some resolution of a particular situation. And there was something that Reverend Mother said in this room. There was a disagreement. And she said there was essentially a very difficult time trying to find a middle ground and a way forward. Reverend Mother said, y'all aren't listening. You have to learn how to treat their feelings as holy. I couldn't even take notes no more than me than Brendan. Hey, I was done, bro. I was done. Because at the end of the day, whether I agree with you or not, you feel a type of way about something I've done. I have to at least respect how you feel. Mm-hmm. And then my responsibility in love from that point to say, all right, how can I better understand this? That doesn't mean I agree with your point of view. That doesn't mean I even did what you said I did, but it is to say expressively, externally, physically, I should be able to acknowledge how you feel. I should be able to acknowledge your point of view and treat however you feel, whatever you're presenting, your thoughts as holy. I should be able to handle them with care. It's back to that word I said last month, man, compassion.
Okay, I got to jump in, Minister Harrison, because that was not an original Reverend Mother. I have to give credit where credit is due. And that was Reverend Dr. Obery Hendricks that I learned that from. Great theologian. But you're right. We must treat the people's needs as holy. And that helps us move forward. I saw one comment in the from Jawan. He talked about how we had monetized things. I can't remember exactly what he said, but I think this was something I said. He said because wrongness was monetized. And that is so true. And I believe that we often wrap capitalism in God talk. And so it has no power to change anything. But at the heart of the matter, it is we are all human beings. And if we, Harrison, treat each other's needs as holy, we will find a common ground that allows us to be able to walk together in harmony and in health.
You know what, Mama? It reminds me, Ray, remember earlier this week, I was telling you about my visit to the National Cathedral and my experience there and how I left there like so discouraged about the church because to me, that building is just a graveyard for rich folks and important folks. I was supremely surprised that Woodrow Wilson is buried like not even 10 feet away from people where people sit. I don't know about y'all, but it was never in my Bible or in my intention as a Christian or as a person that loves God at all to be worshiping around dead people. I don't need to worship around like remains. And it was interesting to me that like I literally asked the question. I was like, when she first told us, I was like, because I had seen another one that I thought was just like I thought it was just like a play tune, like nobody was in there for real. It was just like there to kind of commemorate the person. And I asked the guy, I was like, is this common? And she was like, well, common, no, but she basically was like, it was for rich folks or important people in the church. And then we just kept going around and it was the one section where the family paid for their son to be buried in there and paid for 3 more slots and we got down to the basement into the crypt and they was like, yo, it's potentially over 300 people in here. And I just I lost my mind and was like, yo, what is this? To me, this is in no way, shape, or form a true representation of church. It's not. That's crazy to me that we feel like this building is a pinnacle of church when it is literally a gravesite. I have never associated worshiping a living God at a gravesite, so I don't understand. I have real big problems with the National Cathedral after visiting.
Hey, but Brendan, doesn't that put you closer to God?
No, it don't. It
I'm
put
just-
them closer to
I'm
God.
just-
They there.
I'm
You know,
just-
they wherever they at. I'm still here, and I want to stay here. I don't even want to be close to them right now. When
Yeah.
I get there, I'll get there. You know what I mean? That's one of them. You call ahead like, yo, who all there? And if I hear the right people is there, yeah, man, I'm cool on that, man. Like
Yeah.
it just, it really, it shook me because it was like, and I don't want to. Like the beauty of the building is amazing. The intentionality that was placed into the building is amazing. Like the artistry and all of that. But it really it shook me because I realized just how embedded capitalism in the theory of gaining wealth and power is in a church that was originally like that was supposed to be and is supposed to be about tearing down those systems for the people.
I want to push. We're getting closer to our time. I want to go back. Tolu, I want to ask you this question. Folks, I know you all know that Tolu works with journalism and at the White House. So we're trying to make sure that we ask our brother questions that he can feel as comfortable as he can answering. And so I guess the question I want to ask you here is, you're around the rhetoric, you're around the noise, you're around all this stuff all the time. You see the good, the bad, the ugly, and your job in so many ways is to report it to us, the other people or the people, and let us know the facts, if you will, right? And so I have this question of fact. And I'm asking you not only, not really just as a journalist, but I'm asking you as a person, to the whatever extent you can answer this, in your heart, in your mind, being around the noise, being around the rhetoric, being around all that stuff every day. What's the thing that in your heart you're like, if we could just do this, if we could just, if we as a people, and we could, the capital C is a church, if we as a people could just, how much better it would be, right? What's that thing?
That's a tough one. In part because we have a lot of work to do. There's a lot that needs to be done in our country, in the church. But I'll answer it from the perspective of a journalist, of a storyteller, of someone who wrote about of someone who became a public figure and who people thought they knew just based off of a 9-minute video. And one of the things that we're so quick to do is to reduce someone down to a stereotype or a single story or just one thing and put someone in a box right away. And I think if we were able to engage with people in the fullness of who they are, in the fullness of their full story, and the complexities and the nuance of an individual, and not be so quick to just put someone in a box right away and move on, or put someone in a box and label them for eternity, I think we would get a lot further. It would make it much harder to demonize people and make it much harder to, be at one another's throats all the time. And I think collaboration and, being able to work together, being able to have coalitions, which you need, especially when you're a minority, especially when, you don't really have the same power as someone who is a lawmaker or a policymaker. I do think, that's what Jesus would have done. That's what he did when he, had the tax collector come over to his house, Zacchaeus, and, people said, that's a tax collector. He's over here taking everybody's money. Why, Jesus saw something, more nuanced in him. He said that he saw that there was something deeper in him. I think that's something that we could do as a people. That's something we could do as a church, is to really take the time to engage with one another and with different people who are different from us, and people who it's very easy to stereotype. George Floyd was someone who, even before he died, would be very easy to stereotype. You could say, oh, this guy's on the corner. He's up to no good. He's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. And, I find myself potentially guilty of that. before I embarked on this book project where I got to know George Floyd, unfortunately, in his death, but in talking to people who knew him, people who did take the time to, get to know him. And I found someone who was much more, had much more depth, had much more nuance and complexity to him. And I think if we're able to do that, we can unlock all kinds of possibilities, and we can figure out ways to build coalitions with people who you might not think you would be in a coalition with, because you never really gave them the chance. You never really got beyond the stereotype, and you never really were able to engage with that part of that person that you can connect with. And I think that's something that in the social media age, in this fast moving society that we're in, it's very easy to just put someone in a box and say, okay, this is who this person is. Let me move on to the next. It's much harder to try to engage with someone, try to engage with someone's story, try to find that positive part of someone. And that's what I really value about what Reverend Dent said, Mama Dent, I should say, in terms of being able to find someone's needs, see someone's needs and see them as holy, see that different perspective in someone. As a journalist, it's actually my calling to be doing that, but it's so easy to not do that and get caught up in deadlines and the fast moving society. You're like, all right, this person is this, and this is the character they're going to be. And there's no chance for them to move out of that box. But if we really take the time to engage with people, I do think we'll be able to see them in that deep way, and see them in ways that we can connect with and build with and build coalitions with, and be able to make change.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect way to really end our segment tonight. I want to ask and Tolu, one more time, if we could ask you this question. One, thank you for being our special guest this evening. This has been really enriching, and we are so humbled that you took the time to be with us. God really is continuing to open doors for us in a way that's amazing, and being able to connect with amazing people like yourself. I hope that you will be able to share our platform with some of your folks too. Let them know we're not just about, building a church, but we're about connecting with people and loving people. The book, if you don't have the book, please pick up the book. Tolu, is there, in sort of in the same vein as that last question, is there one thing you want people to take away from the book? What's the one thing you want people to grapple with as they read through this, and as they go on about their lives after they've read the book, put it down, shared it with a family member, whatever? What is the thing that you want to resonate with them as they walk away from the book, but not away from life?
I think there's a lot in this book that's, difficult. We engage with a lot of difficult subjects. Racism can be frustrating and traumatizing, but I want people to take away the hope of a people, the hope of a people that have dealt with these things and kept their chins up for 400 years and are still fighting, are still in the fight. It's the same hope of George Floyd's family, of the people who took up his cause after he died. And I think that hope has to be inspiring. If you look at, the kind of trauma that people have been subjected to and have still stood up and still, fought for this country, fought to make it better, fought to try to, lift up their fellow man and make their lives better for the next generation. And so, we have a lot to be grateful for, that so many people and generations before us fought to give us, the position that we have now to be able to make change for the next generation and even for our own families. And so you kind of have to have that hope to be able to carry forward, because if you read about all the trials and all the tribulations and all the land theft and stolen wages and stolen futures of the past, it can be very easy to get downtrodden and say, oh, what's the point? But I look at the other side of the story, the fact that people endured all that and still picked themselves up and still were hopeful and still were willing to, engage in trying to make things better for the next generation, make things better for their fellow man. And so it's the same kind of hope that, you read about in the Bible, where you see people who had every reason to give up. Joseph, people who were fought and lied about and mistreated and given all kinds of negativity, and they still found hope. They still found a way to continue. And so I do think that's something I want people to take from the book, because that is the enduring part of what we were able to do. The last chapter of the book is titled American Hope, in that vein. And it's sort of a rallying cry for people to keep fighting and keep pushing forward. George Floyd doesn't have a voice anymore, but millions of people took up his cause. And so that's the same cause that a lot of us are looking to take up as well, in terms of making sure that this is a country that does not become a comfortable place for racial injustice, even though it has calcified under the surface. We want systemic racism and things that represent injustice to find things uncomfortable. We want it to be uncomfortable for the institutions. We want it to be uncomfortable for the people in power who push forward those ideas. And so I want people to take away the hope that is required in order to make that happen, because it's not easy. But when you do have that hope, when you do realize where we've come from, it does encourage you to continue with that. So that's what I hope the takeaway is for people who are able to read the book. I do hope that people come away from the book with a lot of hope that things can get better if we continue to fight for it.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Listen, again, thank you for being here. To all of our Wellians, for the folks in the comments, our Wellians, Allison, Jawan, Giovanni, Corey, Jordan, Torin, all of the folks who are part of our community. Love you so much. Sean, so glad that you guys could be here. I think I saw Tony Love on earlier, and a couple of other folks, Annie, Mama Annie, and so many other folks, Ashley, Maria. Just thank y'all for being here. Next week is going to be just as powerful, because next week we're talking about the weaponizing of sexuality. And so that's going to be a deep, dope conversation as well. You guys know that we are an online community, but we want you to consider being a part of our community. And then all that takes is for you to say, hey, I'm a part of the Wellians. And that's it. That makes you a part of the Wellians. And then if you want to know a little bit more about this God that we follow, that allows us to not always be in agreement, we can disagree and still respect and love each other. Reach out, get to know us, DM us on all of our platforms, and I promise you we will get back with you. But there is a God. There is a God that loves us, and there is a God that we are created in the image of. And so if you want to know more about that God, listen, we will talk to you about that God, because that's who allows us to do this type of ministry. If you'd like to follow us, all of our social media, our website stuff is all at Encounter the Well. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. You can follow us there, subscribe to all of our stuff. If you're not a part of our email list, you would love to you would love to be a part of that. Please DM us, let us know your information. You can email us at wearetheWellDC@gmail.org. wearetheWellDC@gmail.org. And then if you like to give, because it does take money, listen, we're doing this amazing thing. We're building this database. People can tell you where the best club is. People can tell you where the best food spots are. People can tell you where the best place to get your Jordans, your clothes are. What they cannot always tell you is where they can find the best mental health, where they can find help for domestic violence. The Well is taking it upon itself to build a database. Our justice people are trying to build a database to make sure that we become the well that you can tap into, to know we are the place that you can find that resource. Listen, if you know of people that we should communicate with and contact, let us know so that we can reach out and put them in that database so that we can become that well. Also, if you want to invest in helping us so that we can mobilize and create and build and help for our folks get paid for some of the work they're doing, you can support the Well by texting to give. The number is there on the screen, 84321. Any dollar amount. You can go to encounterthewell.org/give. We'd love for you to become a reoccurring donor with us. We're actually trying to build a campaign where we can get 75 people who are willing to give $100 a month. That'll help us on our way to sort of building out who we are. And then make sure you pick up this amazing book. His name is George Floyd. I think you can pretty much pick it up anywhere. I got my copy from Barnes and Nobles. I know that it is on Amazon. Tolu, I don't know if there's a best place to buy it.
Anywhere, your local bookstore, online, whatever's most convenient for you.
Awesome. His name is George Floyd. Please pick it up. And I tell you what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to find a way between this week and next week to do some sort of competition, and we're going to gift at least 2 books to our Wellians. We're going to gift this book to at least 2 of our Wellians. So look out on our social media. We're going to come up with a way to make sure that we can gift this book to 2 of our folks, and we'll let you know what that looks like. Brennan B., Minister Harrison, Mama Dent, thank y'all so much. You know, this is squad up in the building. Any last minute comments before we log off?
No, man, I think for me, I enjoyed this conversation, partially because I think when we first talked about it, we were looking at it from not where the conversation went. I don't think we kind of really outlined the ways that, you know, race has been weaponized in the church. I think we kind of operated from the standpoint of that's the understanding. Let's move forward from there, and I love that. I love that conversation and that path that we went on. So, you know, I'm happy. You know, I always got to drop some J. Cole bars and show some love to hip hop. So we good.
I want Tolu to say his name.
My name?
Yes.
Tolu Olorunipa.
Tolu Olorunipa.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ray, you can't let Mama. I'll shine you next time, bro.
I know, right?
Like first go. That was just a trial run.
Next time we have a special guest, I mean, you gotta get it right. First try. She got
Absolutely.
First try.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. Harrison.
No, that's I'll just re-highlight my comment. I ain't got much to say. It's 2 Chronicles, man. In your Bible, if you got it and can read it, man. 2 Chronicles chapter 17, verse 14. Chapter 7, verse 14. We get an instruction from the Lord, and he tells us from our Father, and he says, if my people, he said, now when you see things going wrong, if my people would do this, I'll do this. If my people would humble themselves, we already talked about that. Humble yourselves and pray. We missing that a lot of places. If they would seek my face, yep, we're gonna keep going. Turn from my wicked ways. He said, then will I hear from heaven. I'll forgive their sin. I'll heal the land. It was a simple instruction, to be able to get out in words. But I think in trying to enact that as humanity, we kind of have a bit of a hard time figuring that out. But it's not like we don't have a pathway. And I think that's my whole point in even emphasizing this, is that he gave us a lot of the answers already. We want to look for them in so many other places. Not to say that we can't get other answers other places. He gave us the roadmap. Use the roadmap. If I'm walking into a test on test day and the teacher let me have a cheat sheet, I'm not walking in here trying to take the test out of memory that I don't have. No. Bring that sheet, big dog. Come on. I need that. Because we're trying to pass this test. So when we start seeing things going wrong, go to the cheat sheet. I think that's a lot of what we have kind of hinted on. Go to your cheat sheet. You got a Bible. You can read it, man. You can pray. And if you don't, or don't know how, or don't know what, if you don't know, or if you just don't, we do. I promise you, we are right here for you. Ray gave
the first tip earlier. Ray gave the first tip earlier. Pull up your britches, man.
Yes, sir. Hey, I'm posting that every day. All right.
And on that note, we're going to continue praying for Brother Tolu. We will continue to pray for you, brother. If you ever need us just to cover, just to talk, brother, we are here. We know you're taking on a load on your shoulders out there in the world every day. And we want to always just be a folk in a community that you can rely on as well. Please keep us up to date. If there anything new or things that we can show up at is a community and support things that maybe even if you can't support, we can support. we would love to be there, brother. And let's keep this relationship going. Thank you again for your hard work. Thank you for your dedication. Thank you for the book. And thank you for being here with us. Well, Squad, we love y'all, and we will see you next week.